Hello everyone, and welcome to the press webinar for the IEA's new special report, Nuclear Power and Secure Energy Transitions, from today's challenges to tomorrow's clean energy systems. I'm Jethro Mullen, Editor-in-Chief in the IEA's communications team, and I'm joined today by our Executive Director, Dr. Fatih Birol, and our Director of Energy Markets and Security, Kesuke Sadamori, who oversaw the new report. After opening remarks by Dr. Birol, Mr. Sadamori will present the key findings of the report. After that, we will have time for questions from journalists. For the journalists taking part in this press webinar, we invite you to submit your questions via the Q&A function in the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation, starting now. And with that, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, Dr. Birol.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mullen. Greetings to all the colleagues from International Energy Agency headquarters in Paris. So I would like to first of all welcome all of the journalists and the viewers of this webinar to our new report on nuclear power and secure energy transitions. In this publication, in this report, we review the role of nuclear energy plays today, and what kind of role it can play in the future in the context of a secure, sustainable, and affordable energy system. Some of you may remember those colleagues who follow our work, especially on electricity markets and nuclear. We already made a report on nuclear in the year 2019. At that time, we reviewed the challenges in front of the nuclear industry and the contribution nuclear might make on the energy security and climate change. One of the key findings of that study was the lifetime extension of existing nuclear power plants emerged as a key option to reduce emissions, while it also proves to be a cost-effective option. So it was more of an appeal to especially advanced economies, where the several nuclear power plants came to a critical age, and we were happy to see that after we made this report, there has been good progress on this point, as 10% of nuclear capacity in the world has been granted lifetime extensions since 2019, when we made this report. Now, in this report, my colleague, Mr. Sadamori, will give you some of the key findings, but the main message when I look at the report, the data, the findings, when we talk with the governments, industry, and the financial actors, the main message is the following. Nuclear is set to make a comeback. And we see several indications at the government level, industry level, regulator level, the financial sectors level. But this will depend on certain conditions to be fulfilled. Now, before what those conditions are to be fulfilled and who should fulfill which conditions, I would like to just briefly say, why do we think now nuclear can make a comeback? So there are at least two critical drivers for that. The first one is energy security. We were already seeing before the current war context that there was a growing appetite for nuclear power But it is with the high energy prices, with growing attention on energy security, also together with the national security of many governments, we are seeing that the several countries around the world are reviewing their position vis-à-vis nuclear power. These are countries who already have a nuclear industry, and also some countries who are for the first time looking at the nuclear option. So if I have to give a couple of examples, just to put our argument better for our viewers and the media. First of all, some countries, such as Belgium and Korea, who have decided to phase out their nuclear plants, they have recently scaled back plans to phase out existing nuclear plants. Another front, in the United States, new programs and billions in funding will support lifetime extensions and new advanced reactors. In France, where the International Energy Agency is, the France plans to build 6 new large reactors starting in 2028, 6 years from now, and with the option to build additional 8 power plants by 2050. Poland set out a new nuclear program, both in terms of the large-scale and small reactors. And to give you another category of example, United Kingdom, UK, energy security strategy includes plans for 8 new large reactors. And perhaps I mention also Japan. In Japan, there is a growing interest in restart of the nuclear plants, especially those who have received safety approval from nuclear regulatory agency. So these policies are mainly the change in the policies, a new positioning of the countries, governments vis-à-vis nuclear, is mainly driven by energy security concerns and the high natural gas prices since several months. But there is another driver of our argument, our thesis, that the nuclear is set to make a comeback, which is on the climate change front. Some of you may remember, again, last year in May, we published a report, the Net Zero Roadmap for the world for up to 2050, which is now being used by many governments, many industry players, the investors as a benchmark. And when you look at that report, one of the things that we say that the electricity demand will grow very strongly, more electrification of our energy systems, and the bulk of the electricity generation will be, an overwhelming part will be dominated by solar, followed by wind, by renewables. But in addition to that, we also see a role of nuclear power, another technology, electricity technology, which doesn't emit carbon dioxide emissions. And our report foresees a doubling of the current nuclear capacity by 2050, and still it is a modest part of the total global electricity generation, which is dominated by renewables. Now, in addition to being a low carbon or zero carbon electricity generation technology, nuclear power would provide support for the renewable technologies being dispatchable and provide essential system services and as such complete the leading role of renewables. In our report, my colleagues, Mr. Sadamori and his colleagues look at what would happen instead of a more nuclear if we would see less nuclear option in the future, and their conclusion is it would be technically more challenging, more expensive, and riskier. So therefore, we thought we should bring this to the attention of the decision makers of our finding. Now, dear colleagues, before passing the floor to Mr. Sadamori, I would like to once again say that we see a fertile ground for nuclear power to make a comeback. However, this is not guaranteed. We have to see both on the side of the governments and on the side of the industry, certain steps need to be taken, and seriously. In terms of the, first of all, industry, starting from there, especially in the advanced economies, the industry, nuclear industry, had a lot of delays in the projects and cost overruns in the last several years, and as such, when we look at the numbers projects that are studied, look at all the projects under construction, and what my colleagues found out is that since 2017, in the last 5 years, 27 out of 31 reactors that have started construction in the last 5 years are either Russian or Chinese design. And again, this is mainly driven, in our view, by the rather poor performance of the nuclear industry in the advanced economies, in addition to other reasons. Now, also another role for government this time after industry, we would like to see if the governments and the countries who would like to have nuclear in their own countries, they have to find ways to facilitate investments in nuclear industry, because without the provide this support from the governments, it will be very difficult. The nuclear industry and the nuclear power plants will generate enough investments if the framework is not there. And here, the one critical issue is the cost. Again, according to our analysis, in order to be nuclear to be competitive, we need to see some 40% decline in the construction costs of nuclear. And this will happen through, of course, providing support and by doing, learning by doing, and the industry being much more cost effective than it has been recently. So one other final issue maybe in our report, we also, in addition to analyzing the large-scale nuclear plants of yesterday, today and tomorrow, we also look at the small modular reactors, as we think it is a promising technology which could answer some of the questions of the the nuclear industry is raising today. And when we look at the government policies around the world, we are seeing a recent burst of development driven by a surge in government support, huge support. And with grants for SMRs now measured in billions of dollars, and those grants are 10 times the level of just a few years ago. In the last few years, these grants increased by a factor of 10. We see this in the United States, China, France, UK, Canada, Japan, and Russia. And when we talk with those countries and the companies who are working on SMRs, we see that there is a strong competition among those companies who would deliver the first competitive projects. SMRs, our report notes, are smaller in scale, more affordable, and offer safety, and the waste management improvements are also important advantages of SMRs. And today there are 6 SMRs in operation or under construction, and 3 of them are in China, 2 in Russia, and 1 in Argentina. So this is our a bit of an overview on our report. Again, as I said, this is a report to provide a basis for governments, industry to look at, to see when they are reviewing their nuclear energy policy. It ranges from the lifetime extensions of the existing power plants to the new promising technologies such as SMRs, and it analyzes the recent government policies in nuclear power, and coming at the end of the day with a conclusion that nuclear is set to make a comeback driven by energy security and climate concerns, but it is not guaranteed. It will depend on whether or not government and industry will make the right steps. With this, I would like to turn to my colleague, Mr. Sadamori, who is the Director of Energy Markets and Security, who oversaw this report with an excellent team. Over to you, Mr. Sadamori.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Birol. Thank you, Dr. Birol. As explained by the Executive Director, energy crisis exacerbated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and climate crisis are the drivers behind this report. The renewables would provide the dominant share in the net zero electricity systems, and the higher their share would become, the higher the value of other low carbon and dispatchable power generation sources would be. A growing number of countries have reevaluated the role of nuclear. Belgium and Korea have recently scaled back plans to phase out existing nuclear plants. Japanese Prime Minister stated that the faster restarts of nuclear reactors that have received safety approvals could free up LNG cargoes desperately needed in Europe or other markets in Asia. The United Kingdom, France, China, Poland, and India have recently announced energy strategies that include substantial roles for the nuclear power, and the United States is investing in advanced reactor designs. In the decade following the 1973 oil shock, the construction started on almost 170 gigawatt of nuclear power plants, and these plants still represent 40% of today's the nuclear capacity. With policy support and tight cost control, today's energy crisis could lead to a similar revival for the nuclear energy in countries that accept it. The nuclear power made up of about 10% of global electricity generation in 2020. This share has declined from 18% in the late 1990s, but nuclear is still the second largest source of low-emission electricity after hydroelectricity and the leading source in advanced economies. In 2020, the nuclear electricity still exceeded the total combined contribution of wind and solar PV generation worldwide. Nuclear power contributes to both energy security and climate goals by avoiding 1.5 gigatons of global emissions. Nuclear energy could play an important role in ensuring that the energy sector's journey to net zero emissions is rapid and secure. Widespread electrification of end uses is a critical element for achieving net zero emissions. Global electricity demand will grow 2.5 times over the next decades. Low-emission electricity generation would need to increase to supply such a rapid demand growth, increasing sevenfold from 2020 to 2050. New low-emissions power capacity needs to quadruple to 800 gigawatt per year in the 2020s and 1,200 gigawatt per year, more than 1 terawatts per year in the 2030s. So emissions are from heat production, which is provided predominantly from unabated fossil fuels today, should be reduced. And low emissions hydrogen need to grow fast, with a nuclear a possible option. And finally, we need new technologies and innovations, including advanced nuclear. At the same time, we must recognize the challenges that have faced the industry. The rising construction costs and lead times have plagued the nuclear industry in many countries in recent years. The recent nuclear power plants projects in Europe and the United States have experienced considerable delays and cost overruns. This has not always been the case for nuclear construction, as the nuclear reactors in operation around the world today took on average 7 years to build, while 15 of them took 15 years or more. 152 were built in 5 years or less. Advanced economies have lost the market leadership. Although the advanced economies have nearly 70% of global nuclear capacity, this fleet is aging, with the average of 36 years in North America, and 38 years in Europe. Investment in nuclear power in advanced economies has stalled over the last 2 decades because of high costs of new projects, long construction times, unfavorable electricity market and policy environment, and in some countries, a lack of a public confidence after the large-scale accidents. On the other hand, the construction activities have picked up substantially in emerging market and developing economies, particularly in China, which has completed the most new nuclear capacity in each of the last 9 years. Of the 31 reactors that commenced construction since the beginning of 2017, 27 of these are either Russian design or Chinese design, with 2 of European design under construction in the United Kingdom and 2 Korean designed units in Korea. And Russia dominates the export market. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has raised questions about the export prospects for Russian-built nuclear plants. And recently, Finland has cancelled a contract for a new reactor with Rosatom, signed in 2013, citing delays and increased risks due to the war in Ukraine. Nuclear power plays a significant role in a secure global pathway to net zero. nuclear power doubles from 413 gigawatt in early 2022 to 812 gigawatt in 2050 in the net zero scenario. Annual nuclear capacity additions reach 27 gigawatts per year in the 2030s, and that's higher than any decade before. Even so, the global share of nuclear in total generation falls slightly to 8%. Emerging market and developing economies account for more than 90% of global growth, with China set to become the leading nuclear power producer before 2030. Advanced economies collectively see a 10% increase in nuclear as retirements are offset by new plants, mainly in the United States, France, UK, and Canada. The industry has to deliver projects on time and on budget to fulfill its role. This means completing nuclear projects in advanced economies at around $5,000 per kilowatt by 2030, and that's 40% below the reported costs of the recent first-of-a-kind projects. There are some proven methods to reduce costs, including finalizing designs before starting construction, sticking with the same design for subsequent units, and building multiple units at the same site. Stable regulatory frameworks throughout the construction would also help avoid delays. The resurgence of nuclear power in the net zero scenario entails a massive increase in investments in the coming decades to build new nuclear reactors and to extend the operational lifetime of existing ones. The global investments in nuclear surges to over $100 billion in the first half of the 2030s in the net zero scenario, and that's over 3 times the average of the 2010s. The nuclear investment decline after 2035 as the power sector nears full decarbonization. While a significant step up, investments in nuclear power accounts for less than 10% of the total for low-emission sources of electricity to 2050, with renewables dominating the market and the renewable investments reaching $1.3 trillion per year in the 2030s. The focus for nuclear investment in the net zero scenario shifts gradually from emerging economies to advanced economies. Over the period to 2050, the advanced economies account for about half of the global nuclear investments at close to $50 billion per year. And that's almost fourfold the average in the 2010s. These countries' investments needs are high relative to their share of global capacity due to higher construction costs, plus the need to extend the lifetimes of the existing reactors to offset retirements. The extending nuclear plant's lifetime is an indispensable part of a cost-effective path to net zero by 2050. About 260 gigawatt, or 63% of today's nuclear power plants, are over 30 years old and nearing the end of their initial operating licenses. In the past 3 years, the policy and regulatory approvals extended the lifetimes of plants representing about 10% of the worldwide nuclear fleet, with a total capacity of 50 gigawatts. Despite this, the nuclear fleet operating in advanced economies could still shrink by 1/3 by 2030 without granting further extensions, as there are pending policy and regulatory decisions on reactors with a total capacity of almost 60 gigawatts. In the net zero scenario, the existing fleet of nuclear reactors provides a stronger foundation on which to build transitions. Further lifetime extensions are a critical part of the cost-effective pathway, as, despite requiring substantial investments, they have a levelized cost of electricity generally below $40 per megawatt hour, making them competitive even with solar and wind in most regions. Less nuclear power would make net zero ambitions harder, more expensive, and more risky. The low nuclear case for the net zero scenario considers the impact of failing to accelerate nuclear construction and extend lifetimes, with nuclear's share of total generation declines from 10% in 2020 to only 3% in 2050. And that's compared with 8% in the case of a net zero scenario. Solar and wind would need to fill the gap, placing more pressure on these technologies and pushing the frontiers of integrating high shares of variable renewables. To maintain electricity security, far more battery storage and carbon capture technologies would become needed. There are three implications of less nuclear, and they would be: first is higher overall costs. Higher investments and fuel costs would cost the consumers an extra $20 billion per year over the next 3 decades. Second is additional strain on clean energy supply chains. For every 1 gigawatt reduction in nuclear capacity in the low nuclear case, an additional 3.5 gigawatt of capacity from other sources would become necessary, with a greater call on critical minerals for both power generation technologies and grid infrastructure. Third is high exposure to natural gas and coal market prices. So coal and gas prices will be more important for consumer electricity bills, removing a degree of the shelter from the market volatility that is offered in the net zero case. An even larger role for nuclear could emerge if the industry can deliver lower costs than those in the net zero scenario. If construction costs of nuclear power could fall to $2,000 to $3,000 per kilowatt, it would mean $40 to $80 per megawatt hour, including decommissioning and waste disposal, and be competitive against other dispatchable low-emission sources like hydropower, bioenergy, and fossil fuel plants equipped with a CCUS. This could expand opportunities in the low-emissions electricity market. The major prize in the net zero pathway were the investments scaling up to over $1.1 trillion in the 2030s. Low-emission hydrogen and heat, while much smaller markets, offer additional opportunities for nuclear power. The rapid expansion of low-emission hydrogen is a key pillar of the net zero scenario. For nuclear to compete with blue and green hydrogen, investment costs would need to decrease to $1,000 to $2,000 per kilowatt. There are also possibilities to co-generate heat from nuclear plants to replace district heating and other high-temperature uses, though the potential scale of this market is limited. The construction costs would need to fall to $2,000 to $3,000 per kilowatt to make nuclear competitive in this space. The market designs and risk mitigations for investors are crucial for nuclear and other dispatchable sources to play their roles. Nuclear and other dispatchable power sources complement renewables by providing critical services to the electricity systems. The predominance of wind and solar in the power mix and the end of unabated fossil fuel generation must be complemented by a diverse mix of dispatchable generation to provide stability, short-term flexibility, and adequate capacity during the peak demand periods. For example, in our analysis of carbon-neutral power systems in China, nuclear would provide only 10% of total electricity produced in 2060, but supply almost half the required inertia. a key component of system flexibility and stability. The wholesale markets should price system services to reflect their value. The need for system services such as flexibility, adequacy, and stability increases sharply as the share of variable renewables increase. Electricity markets should be designed to fully value these services, not just the electricity production. In addition, the robust carbon pricing regimes would encourage a more decarbonized energy systems at the lowest cost. Even still, the government involvement would be needed to finance new investments. Nuclear projects have long relied on state ownership or the regulated monopoly structure to guarantee revenues and reduce risks to investors, because there is rarely sufficient private sector finance for such capital-intensive and long-lived assets, particularly those exposed to significant policy risk. Innovative financing mechanisms such as the recently approved regulated asset base model by the UK can help to secure adequate financing while assigning risks to those best situated to accept it. Now finally, the small modular reactors, SMRs, are among the most promising technologies. They are generally defined as advanced nuclear reactors with a capacity of less than 300 megawatts, and that's less than 1/3 of an average large-scale reactor. The momentum is building behind SMRs with a burst of recent activity. At the start of 2022, there were 3 SMRs in operation, 3 under construction, and over 60 under development. Being smaller can help SMR fit in. Lower capital costs, inherent safety, and waste management attributes, and reduced project risks may improve social acceptance and attract private investment for research, development, and demonstration. SMRs could also reuse the sites of retired fossil fuel power plants, taking advantage of existing transmission, cooling water, and a skilled workforce. The other opportunities include co-locations with industry to provide electricity, heat, and hydrogen. The SMRs have strong political and institutional support, but policy and regulatory reforms are needed to stimulate the investments. There are substantial grants in the US and increased support in Canada, the UK, and France. This support makes it possible to attract private investors, bringing new players and new supply chains to the nuclear industry. Adapting and streamlining licensing and regulatory frameworks to take SMR attributes into account is key. International harmonization of licensing and definitions are essential to developing a global market. So here are some concluding bullets, and the IEA stands ready to support the security, affordability, and sustainability of energy through all fuels and all technologies approach. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadamori, for the presentation, and to Dr. Birol for the opening remarks. We now have some time to take questions from journalists. So we invite the journalists who are in attendance to send your questions via the Q&A function of the Zoom if you haven't done so already. And do please state your news organization alongside your question if you can. We'll take a 2-minute break for you to send us your questions, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you very much to the journalists for your questions. We're getting quite a few, so we're going to do our best to answer as many as possible. Those we don't get to, we will follow up with the journalists via email. But the first one from Ronald Kim from Argus Media. Does the IEA agree on the new South Korean government's plan to raise the share of nuclear in the country's energy mix that also includes lifetime extensions of existing nuclear power plants, as well as building new reactors, given it's a major importer of fossil fuels and lacks enough renewable energy infrastructure to challenge domestic thermal power generation? I think Dr. Birol is going to take this first question. Dr. Birol.
South Korea is a country that imports a huge amount of energy, a major energy importing country, from natural gas to coal to oil. And South Korea is also a country which has strong climate targets. And if you put this together, I believe the South Korea's government to revisit, first of all, their policy of phasing out of nuclear, scaling back is, in my view, a good one. And if country would also go for the way of increasing the share of nuclear power in order to improve the energy security, to allow more renewables to be a part of the electricity mix, and as well as reducing emissions, I would be surprised, and I think it may be a reasonable way to go. Having said that, again, we have to be very careful that the South Korean government takes the necessary steps to provide the mobilization of investment, facilitating the investment, and all the safety measures, of course, to be observed.
Thank you, Dr. Birol. The next question, also from Argus, is what would be the impact of the Russian government banning exports of uranium or nuclear power plant technology or equipment to the global nuclear industry? I think Mr. Sadamori is going to take this question.
Well, first of all, we do not want to make any speculation about what can possibly happen. But in terms of the nature of the nuclear energy, I would like to point out that the nuclear power plants, the kind of requirement to refueling, kind of changing fuels, would not be so frequent. So once they install the nuclear fuel, it can last for a long time. So that means that the kind of the exposure to kind of short term, the disruptions is rather limited. So that's what we can say. But at the same time, of course, it will be very important for the kind of the energy industries, the nuclear industries, to diversify the kind of potential sources of various supplies.
Thank you, Mr. Sadamori. The next question concerns Japan, in terms of what steps Japan can take to restart its nuclear fleet. Mr. Sadamori, one for you again.
Thank you. This is about my home country. And so I would like to point out that there are already the substantial the scale of capacity that have received the green light, safety approval from the Nuclear Safety Authority. And there are, as I understand, there are 7 reactors that have received the safety approvals but have not restarted yet. And I think that this is a matter of not about the kind of safety itself, because it has been approved, but it's more about the acceptance, the perception of the public. So in that respect, I think that the governments would have to work hard together with the local governments to secure the public acceptance of the new starts of the nuclear. And also they need to be more kind of clear about the contributions that those restart could make, assuming, of course, the safety safe operation of the plants. They have to be aware that as they do not use the existing nuclear assets, more CO2 are coming out from Japan. And I think that it will be very, and also I understand that there's a very serious capacity issues in the Japanese electricity market. So in that respect, I think that the governments would need to work harder to secure the acceptance, the understanding, the public confidence of the nuclear power.
Thank you, Mr. Sadamori, for that response. The next question concerns France. It comes from Philip Chaffee from Energy Intelligence. He asks, when thinking about nuclear power as a means of providing energy security, how do you account for something like the situation in France right now, when a seemingly generic fault can suddenly force nearly half a nuclear fleet offline? How should energy policymakers contemplating nuclear think about this risk? And I believe Dr. Birol, you can take this question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, this is a rather worrying situation in France, a country which heavily relies on the nuclear power, and rightly so, and enjoy the benefits of nuclear power since decades in terms of cheap and secure electricity as well as low emission factors. But today, according to our numbers, the availability factor of nuclear plants are slightly higher than 50%, about 54%, which is definitely very low. There are three factors contributing to this rather worrying situation. The first one is the large-scale renovation work in order to have lifetime extensions. This is the number one. The second, there were a lot of maintenance work that had to be carried out during the COVID. They have been rescheduled, and as a result of that maintenance work is now being carried out. This is the second factor. And the third factor is in several power plants, the several nuclear reactors. It has been dedicated, it has been found some signs of corrosion. It has still been under investigation. It also led to unplanned outages. All these three together brought us to the current low availability factor of nuclear industry in France. But talking with the operators, talking with the company, and talking with the government, I believe these issues will be resolved soon. And this is a lesson to learn for the nuclear industry. And we said in our report, nuclear industry has to also show a strong performance. This is one of the points. But we believe that this situation will improve sooner rather than later, and it is not a reason to disregard nuclear as one of the safe options. But the risks and challenges are there. Therefore, there is a good job, important job for industry, nuclear industry to play, as well as that of government.
Thank you, Dr. Birol. We're getting quite a few questions. We're running short on time. I think we can squeeze one more in, covering another part of the world. This one from Chen Chen from Xinhua News Agency. And he asks Dr. Birol, how do you see China's achievements in developing nuclear energy over the past years and its potential in the future? And what kind of example has China set for developing countries in the development of nuclear energy? Dr. Birol.
So, thank you. Yes, China has been a key leader of building nuclear power plants in the last few years. And when we look at the Chinese energy and the nuclear strategy, it is not wrong to expect that China will continue to build nuclear power plants. And this will be one of the cornerstones. This is one of the cornerstones of the Chinese energy strategy. It will help Chinese electricity security, and at the same time decarbonization of the Chinese power system. And as such, it shows that the if the governments, what we can learn from that, if the governments, states, takes the nuclear as a national homework, if I may say so, the implementation of nuclear projects goes much faster than elsewhere. Chinese government and the investment methodology is very different than the several advanced economies, and as such, China sees the benefit of construct nuclear power plants much faster, and this is perhaps one example that the countries around the world should consider, which is the important role of governments in terms of erecting new nuclear power plants. But definitely China has been recently the leader of the building nuclear power plants around the world.
Thank you very much to Dr. Birol for that response, and the others, and to Mr. Sadamori for his contribution. Thank you to the journalists for all the excellent questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them. And thank you to everyone who is following this event online for your interest in our work. The new special report on nuclear power is available for free on our website, so do please go take a look if you haven't already. And for journalists who have questions that didn't get answered during the Q&A, we will do our best to follow up with you via email. Do please reach out to our press office if you have more questions. But for now, that concludes our press conference. Thank you and goodbye.